Welcome to The Homeless Conservative, a show about principled politics for exhausted citizens. I am Blake Fisher, and I'm a political junkie so that you don't necessarily have to be. So thank you for joining me for today's show. Got a question for you. Do you trust the science registered trademark? Unfortunately, that term has become a political purity test like everything else in politics today, dividing us into two neatly separated camps. Generally, since COVID, those on the left would say yes, they even put it on signs in their yard. I believe in science as if they are, it's a religion. And on the right, they say no, to a degree that we now have Robert F. Kennedy Jr. in charge of Health and Human Services, who doesn't believe the measles vaccine works. I don't know. This is crazy, right? We're unfortunately at this time where there are several things going on. It's hard to know what studies we can trust because there are so many fraudulent studies out there and so many journals that are publishing stuff that is less than good science, I'd say. Universities aren't sharing their data with us, even though taxpayers are paying for it. They will not share that data sometimes with the federal government, which seems like a problem to me. We're also seeing gatekeepers of universities prioritize scientists having the correct political views above everything else. So we're not seeing sort of pushback on some of the science. We're seeing things being reviewed by their friends as opposed to reviewed by people that would be more skeptical of that scientific study. So overall, it's a bad state of science. And so my guest today is Andrew Follett, who writes about science at National Review. He recently wrote an article titled "Another Harvard Scandal Proves That Science is Broken." And this was about a Harvard professor who was fired for publishing fraudulent studies. So here's my conversation with Andrew. Hey, Andrew, thanks for joining me.
Happy to be here, Blake.
So your recent article in National Review caught my eye about the professor at Harvard being let go for, I guess it was the first person with tenure they had fired since the 60s or something when they did the tenures. Since the 40s, even earlier. So tell us a little bit about what happened, I guess, first. And we're sort of talking about science in general, but this is sort of the jumping off point of the story that we wanted to start talking about.
Okay, well, the short version of this is that, so most academic stuff goes to a thing called peer review, and that is supposed to catch nominal errors, right? It's supposed to absolutely lock things down. Your peers are supposed to keep everyone else in check. It's a bit like how the founding fathers thought Congress and the different branches of government should work. People's rivals are supposed to keep them in check. In practice, what has been happening is I call power review. People give their articles and research to their friends, and then those friends review it, and they find some nominal thing, and it just goes off, and it's not helpful. So what happened in this case was there was a lady named Dr. Francesca Gino, and she was an employee of Harvard. She was being paid about $1 million a year. She was Harvard's fifth highest paid employee, which is really a lot of money. And that's a lot of money. And this lady was an academic superstar. This was not a nobody. She was mentioned prominently in the National Public Radio, the New York Times. She was a huge deal. She was one of their most successful people by far. And she studied honesty and dishonesty through something called nudging. And so the kind of research she was doing was nominally that she'd put a honesty pledge at the top of a form as opposed to the bottom, and she'd say, "Oh, people are way more honest when it's at the top of the form than at the bottom." And this was basically all fraud laws. So,
which is how ironic that it's about honesty.
It's about honesty. That's the hilarious part of this. And it's really, if it wasn't such a horrifying indictment of science, it would be hilarious. So what happened to the story chronologically is one of her graduate students named Zoe developed concerns about this. And she was vehemently warned by her academic advisors and by Harvard not to criticize Gino. And they refused to approve Zoe's thesis unless she deleted criticism of Gino from it. Harvard vehemently punished her, right? And basically held her diploma hostage, which is a huge deal.
Right. For your Harvard education, that I'm sure probably paid a lot of money for.
Do your thesis. I did a thesis. I went to the College of William & Mary, which is the second oldest college in the United States. And that's a huge threat.
Yeah.
That's not nothing. So Harvard, at every opportunity, actively obscured everything that was going on because they were protecting their employee, right? They're very successful, very highly paid employee.
Right, because they're protecting their own. I mean, this is going to be bad for them, too.
Yes. And that was in 2020. And then the Zoe, who was no longer, and someone else who we don't quite know who it was, but somebody else, contacted a team of science bloggers called Data. And they had independent, pre-existing concerns about Gino's work. And they went through a bunch of scientific checks, and they determined that this had to be fraudulent. It couldn't be stupidity. It couldn't be just, a mistake. It couldn't be data issues. It was fraud. And so they raised these concerns. And then now, years later, so Harvard was forced into an investigation. And that investigation got started in 2023, and she was fired last week, basically.
So it took them 2 years to figure out that she was lying, but these science bloggers figured it out pretty quickly by just looking at the data.
And yes, so the data, I don't want to go too deep into the statistics, but it's fraud. It's objectively fraud. Gino also filed a bunch of lawsuits and tried to pin the blame on the person who was accusing her, the grad student, and other people, and was suing Harvard, and there were a bunch of lawsuits. It was very bad. And I'll probably get sued over this.
Well, at least those other the cases against Harvard got dismissed, so I don't think, you're within your rights to write an article about this.
But that doesn't necessarily mean I won't get sued.
Oh, you're right. You're right. It's unfortunate. So this whole thing is. Again, I think it's worth reiterating. This is not just some graduate student at Harvard that faked this data. This is their fifth highest paid employee.
Yes.
A rock star cited in all sorts of media, and
this is their Michael Jordan.
Yeah,
they're LeBron James.
And so, if this is happening at that level, we've got to assume that it's. I guess my first question is this: do you think that that's only happening because she was such a rock star, or do you think that power view thing is going on regardless of the level you are because no one really wants their work checked hard?
So I have two theses on this. One, I think that people are much less likely to investigate really aggressively things that they believe in.
Yeah.
What Gino was saying. So there's a fascinating control group for this. There's an entire field of science called parapsychology. This is the scientific study of psychic phenomenon. Right?
Okay.
And I do not believe in this. This is, in my view, this is entirely fake. And parapsychology manages to generate scientifically significant and statistically significant results at about the same rates of other fields of science. This is literally Ghostbusters stuff.
Yeah.
Right? This is and what's fascinating about this is, and that shows how low the standard is. So for most science, especially social science, something called a confidence interval, and that's how likely you are to think that the result is not random. And that's 95%. So it's 95% chance of it being true. That sounds great. What that actively means is that 5% or 1 in 20 of results will look like they're significant just by sheer chance. So if I'm trying to prove that, ice cream consumption causes drowning deaths, if I just take 20 different data sets for both of those things and I run them, one of them will be significant. I forget about the other 19. I publish the one. Oh, I'm a genius.
Yeah.
Right?
And so does that mean that the standards in general are just so low for what qualifies as peer-reviewed science that how can we trust anything?
So there's enormous pressure to publish in science. If you don't publish stuff, you basically don't exist. And universities are in many ways PR departments for their researchers.
Yeah.
They really, really, really want you to publish because that's how it's called impact factor.
Yeah.
So they are desperate to get people to publish. And if you say, wait a minute, hold on, don't do that, you're not going to be liked.
So the incentive structure there is universities want you to publish because then I assume they get more grant money for science research, right? I mean, just because if you, I assume if the federal government was giving a university a whole bunch of money and they never saw any results from it, they'd stop giving them money, right?
Though hilariously, just the fact that we, the taxpayers, pay for the research does not mean we are entitled to it, hilariously.
Well, yeah, because most of this stuff, I mean, I actually am the dork that doesn't mind diving into a research paper every once in a while if it's something I think that's interesting. But so many of them are behind paywalls. So it's interesting that we're paying the money for it, but I can't access the data or the science or the report or anything.
Really worse than that, the federal government can't access it either.
So they don't even know what the money's going to.
If the federal government asks you to provide your data set that they paid for, you don't have to do it.
Okay, that seems like
this is a thing.
Seems like it seems like the federal government and the taxpayers would have all of the control, all of the ball is in their court, right? I mean, it seems like they have all the strings of power there to say, no, we're not giving you the money unless you give us the data, right? But so why do we not do that?
Because universities are a massive political force. No one wants to take on universities, with some exceptions. They're even in very deep red states, universities are very powerful.
And we've seen that with, I mean, even with a lot of Trump stuff going after universities, we've seen, some of the research grants that got cut from like Alabama. So like Tommy Tuberville is like, wait a minute, hold on, guys. That's the university that I kind of work for. And those people elect me. So
when Harvard and Trump, during the whole Harvard-Trump confrontation, Harvard's first reaction was that to losing their grant money was, we're going to have to execute the lab animals.
Right.
We're literally taking the puppy hostage and holding a gun to its head. This was their first reaction. And Harvard has a $50 billion endowment.
Right. They can keep the puppies alive. Yeah.
It's in politics, we call this Washington Monument Syndrome, where you cut the fat instead of the bone to make it look worse. And that's absolutely what happened here. But back to Gina for a second. So politically motivated lying for advancement should not be surprising. It's incredibly easy for researchers to slightly alter their conclusions, both to find a significant result and to fit a narrative, knowing that the result is too good to check. And if you look at a lot of this is going to be left-wing by its very nature, because most people in universities are left-wing.
Right. Yeah.
I think Harvard is about 3% faculty conservative, which is really low.
Yeah.
And in any group, if you have 97% people saying, I don't like that group, you're going to naturally come to the consensus of, we don't like that group. And whatever they say is untrue.
You're going to have wild biases. I mean, you cannot have a group of people that are 97% homogenous and not run into a problem that you're going to have blinders on to all sorts of stuff.
It's actually even worse than that. So like imagine, for example, just to take an example, imagine a Pfizer laboratory, a drug company, and their mission statement was to prove to you, Blake, that Pfizer drugs have 0 side effects. And every single staff member went into pharmacology specifically to prove to you that Pfizer drugs have no side effects. And then they hand you their latest tests showing, hey, Pfizer drugs have no side effects. Are you going to take that drug, Blake?
I'm certainly not going to take their research at face value,
but
right?
This is literally what happens in universities.
Yeah.
Right? So Nature, which is the most prestigious journal, openly says they refuse to publish any politically incorrect ideas. Like that is in their mission statement. Which is hilarious because who gets to decide what's politically incorrect, right? That's not a scientific thing at all. Not. At my own alma mater, which is George Mason University, for my graduate school, this is a famously pro-free market university. They require new employees to sign a loyalty oath to anti-racism as a condition of employment.
Again, not a scientific thing, right?
And they demand that, quote, every member of our community create a, quote, inclusive and equitable campus environment in which every member of our community, without exception, is valued, supported, and experiences a sense of belonging until George Mason University becomes a national exemplar of anti-racism and inclusive excellence. So if you're a new professor there, if you're a new person there, you can't say anything that goes against that. And the academic job market is so insanely competitive. You have like hundreds of applications for any job.
Yeah, so it's not a thing where people can say, I'm not signing that, because they do not have the power in that situation. They're just going to pick the person behind them that will sign the thing. And it doesn't sound like they actually care about the qualifications for the job as much as they care about the loyalty, as much as they care about whatever,
And one of George Mason's own tenured professors, who I know personally, who's a very famous libertarian economist, openly compared this to the McCarthy-era loyalty oaths to America, and concluded that actually, a devout Leninist could have sworn that loyalty oath because it said that you just can't overthrow the government violently, whereas the new one actively requires you to fully embrace.
Yeah.
And that's horrifying. So we're creating a biased canon of scientific knowledge, which is terrifying. So my own field of scientific expertise is rocks. Yeah, I'm a weirdo. And in that field, it's incredible. If I once had a professor actively pull up a picture of a fracking site and say, this has to have an effect on the earth. And then I raised my hand because I'm a crazy person, and I asked him to show a picture of a lithium mine. Yeah. And I got screamed at. Yeah. By a professor. This is when there's a sufficiently large group of people, they self-organize into an immune system for rejecting new ideas. Yeah. Which is just terrifying. And
which is all science is, right? For the history of science, it's been about new ideas, and most of the time those new ideas are very much not in vogue with 97. You can go back to every major scientific discovery. That person basically got called a lunatic, right? And so that's what drives me so crazy about the trust the science stuff and the scientific consensus as a phrase in general. Scientific consensus doesn't make sense to me, because I thought the point of science was to always question everything all the time, even what we think we already know, because so often we get new technology, we get new research, and we learn that what we thought, it wasn't that it was wrong, it's that we didn't have the complete picture. Yes. And so we now know more than we did. And this is in medicine, this is with rocks, this is with anything, right? I mean, fracking is a great example of something like we did not have the technology to do horizontal fracking 30 years ago. Yes. And so that technology has changed what we now know about that stuff too, right? Yes. And so to me, the scientific consensus thing just makes no sense, because we're always supposed to be questioning what we know. And I think you always need people to push back, but it sounds like there is no avenue for people to do that if we're saying you can't do it at universities, and where else? How do we solve that problem? I mean, where are scientists that are going to ask those tough questions going to be able to do so and be funded to do so?
So and this problem's been a long time coming. So actually, you've heard about President Eisenhower's military-industrial complex speech, right? Yeah. So at the end of that speech, he actually warns about exactly this. Yeah. That science will be held hostage to a technological elite. Yeah. Because of federal money. And since that point in time, in inflation-adjusted dollars, we spend about 30 times more funding the science, and we're not getting the results that we got in 1950. Nothing comparable. And then the pacemaker, just really essential stuff. Yeah. Then, and it's perfectly reasonable for taxpayers to be what am I getting out of this? So the only so I used to work for the space agency way back when, right, in college, and our program to fly a rocket plane on Mars, which sounds great. It's exactly the kind of thing a space agency should be doing. Right. Got cut for global warming stuff. So that's my bias. That's up front. I'm saying that. So I think this is, I think that's a horrifying thing. But if you want to get money from the government, you tell them what they want to believe. Yeah. And then people go out and they find the evidence what science is supposed to be different sides fighting about what's true, and then the truth wins in the end.
Let them argue with us about we're going to pick the people that give us the best argument with the best data, right? I think generally we're smart enough to do so. And not every scientist is going to be a great communicator, but it does seem like on any of these sort of big things, it would behoove universities to be able to have a sort of science PR person that can go out and tell the public and the taxpayers what they found. And if someone argues with them, we should be able to see that debate take place in front of us, right?
No, I am not a medical doctor, but the very clear switch on this was during COVID.
Oh,
So
yeah.
in 2018, and so 538's done really great polling on this. So a total in 2018, there was no partisan divide among Americans who had a great deal of confidence in science. By 2021, that had gone from there was a 30-point gap suddenly.
Oh, yeah. And I think that is absolutely the start of all this stuff, because so much was said. I mean, now I'm going to say, to be fair, to be a little bit fair, I think a lot of people were saying the science said things that no scientist was actually saying. There were people on TV telling us the vaccine means you're never going to be able to give it to anyone or get it. And there was no science that said that. There was no scientist coming on TV and saying that. It was just Rachel Maddow saying that on stuff. But because it they always used trust the science, like you're the idiot for not believing the science. I think sometimes the science got a bad rap. Now, to be fair, scientists at the CDC and NIH, though, absolutely were lying about stuff. We now know. It's like, we know that social distancing was not a thing. We know they lied about masks. We know they lied about the lab leak theory. We know that they poo-pooed on that and said it was a conspiracy theory or you were racist for believing it.
Science.
Yeah. And so, you've got... So I think that's the problem. How do you put that genie back in the bottle, though, when now that partisan divide exists? And I would say that Republicans, I think right now, in my opinion, are going too far and maybe slashing some stuff that we know is good science. It's like AIDS research, AIDS medication, things like that. We're going like, oh, wait, but some of this is actually saving lives and stuff. And to just throw the baby out with the bathwater sometimes feels a little bit, I don't know. A lot
of those grants, the specific cut is determined by the university, and they have a huge incentive to try to undo the cut by only cutting the most popular thing.
Okay, so again, it's taking the puppy hostage kind of thing, right?
Doing that old without this, we won't be able to fund AIDS research. Harvard, you have $50 billion.
Right, again, yeah. Harvard has all the money in the world. They should be able to do all this stuff themselves. They shouldn't really even have to take taxpayer dollars. Obviously, state universities maybe not in the same situation.
And again, science is hard. It's really hard. I publish. It's difficult. And there's a really old story of a guy named Blodot and the N-ray, right? So right after the discovery of the X-ray, which we're all familiar with, this eminent, huge deal French physicist, the Einstein of his day, he was the first person to measure the speed of the radio wave and showed that they propagate at the speed of light. That was a huge deal, right? And he discovered this thing called the N-ray, which would induce a faint brightening of a screen if you pointed at it by being shot through an aluminum prism. And it had all these fascinating properties, and dozens of other scientists confirmed this guy's discovery, especially in France where he was a citizen. But a lot of other ones, and especially in countries that were rivals of France, England and Germany at the time, said, hey, we don't think that's real. And he's put on, Gino said, well, you guys, you're just stupid. That's the problem. And then one day he gave a demonstration of the N-ray and had everything set up properly, and everyone saw the screen brighten, except for the fact that an American scientist had stolen the equipment.
So they were faking it live in front of people?
Well, it shows that, in fact, it's really easy to convince yourself that
that's the cause of it.
Yeah. That's the result. So and this is called blinding in science, right? It's a huge deal. And it's one of the things that everyone's supposed to do. If I'm doing a psychology experiment, right? Well, I'm not a psychologist, but that's a good thing, because psychology, about half of their research is wrong.
Oh yeah. I mean, I was going to say, so a lot of psychology, social scientists, I've read quite a bit that is pretty skeptical about a lot of it.
About more than half of it does not replicate. So an experiment is not valid in science unless someone else on the other side of the world can do the experiment and get the same result you did.
Yeah, we need a different name, I feel for the social stuff. I feel like...
Well, and it's not just the social stuff, though, anymore. So it's much worse in the social stuff. It's much worse. But it's sneaking into physics, it's sneaking into chemistry, it's sneaking into math. It's getting really in there.
Well, and how does that work when it sneaks into something like chemistry or math, where I think that you could not possibly... It doesn't seem... this is because I'm not, obviously... I barely passed chemistry in high school, so that's how great I am at that kind of science. But, it seems like math and chemistry are so not opinion. Like there's no, you can't opinion that, it's like math is math, right?
Sure, you can.
But you can, you're saying.
Trust me, talk to some mathematicians. They disagree on a lot of stuff. And a lot of this, and one of the easiest ways. So people on the left, cancel culture was not invented to hurt the right. It was invented by the left to get people on the left out.
Yeah.
So how colleges work is a lot of people at the highest college will have tenure, which basically means that under normal circumstances, they cannot be fired.
Right.
Right. And those people kind of sit there and they squat in those jobs for like 30 years. So.
Right. Because why would you ever leave a job that you can't be fired
and you're
from?
getting a lot of money.
Yeah.
And most of the actual work of these jobs is being done by teaching assistants and people like that who are very low level and who are paid horribly, often not paid.
Yeah.
Like just horrendous conditions. And this is, in my opinion, this is why people on the left often view the world as very unequal, because colleges actually are.
Yeah, and that makes sense. I mean, I can see why you would think that if you were one of those people. Yeah.
It's bad. I was there. It's bad. They're just basically expected to do all the hard work and then get nothing. A friend of mine spent an extra year in college helping a professor and do his research, and under the promise explicitly that his name would be on the paper, and all he got in the end was a citation like buried on like page 30. And it's real.
And he's paying to go to college for another year to do this.
They're very exploitive. And you have. And the problem with that is that a lot of it is like, it leads to horrible results and huge pressure to publish. And it's also very bureaucratic.
Yeah. So, I mean, so what you basically have is there's no way that that's not like, not just political, but it's all sorts of power structures there you're dealing with. There's all sorts of, not just the political influence of, hey, we've got to publish, but we got to publish things that don't go against these things that is going to get me not even fired. Because if these low level people that are doing it, it's like not going to be able to get me into the job that I want to get. They're going to give it to someone else or get cited or whatever the kind of thing is. I know there's a lot of that with patents and stuff too, if they are doing things that are potentially, where there's an entrepreneurial aspect of it. So,
and a lot of they're effectively pyramid schemes. So if you have a master's degree in sociology, you are qualified to do absolutely nothing but teach sociology. So what ends up happening down the line is these fields get created, and then the only way to keep it going is to force everyone else to take it. Yeah, so a lot of colleges will have mandatory classes and a lot of stuff, and they do that basically to create an artificial market for these things. Like, I mean, when you went, there's a lot of mandatory stuff, and it's often not chemistry or science or math. It's often like, go take, you need 9 credit hours in feminist theory. Yeah. And it's a Ponzi scheme, effectively.
So, I mean, is there, I assume federal funding could be, as we sort of mentioned earlier, it can be a carrot and a stick, right? And you can withhold it. You could say, I mean, is this Congress's job, which is great because they don't do anything. But I mean, is this Congress's job to say, like, this is how we want this money to be spent from now on, and to be able to take the ideology out of it specifically? Because it seems like that's step one, right? I mean, it seems like you've got to figure out a way to get the ideology out, mostly because you are right now saying half the country's ideas of even what they want to potentially look into scientifically are wrong, right?
Before they're even investigated.
Right, before they've even looked into it. Just like, this is something I want to investigate, but scientists don't generally have just loads of money, not from the federal government,
and
right?
Notably, Professor Gino, the original lady who I brought up here, who the dishonest honesty scientist. Yeah. She was a remarkable grant earner for Harvard.
Oh, I'm sure.
She got a lot of money, brought it in. And a lot of that was because, so the theory she was pushing was based on, it's called nudging theory. And basically small, little tiny changes can make huge end results, right? And this was of enormous interest to the Obama administration.
Yeah, I heard they were using it for like
a lot of things,
like canvassing and voter stuff, right?
So, and the guy who literally wrote the book on nudging, he was the administrator of the White House Office of Information and Regulatory Affairs for Obama.
So a little incestuous there.
A little bit. Yeah, he also coincidentally was a Harvard professor.
Yeah. Okay.
I'm sure that was a total coincidence. Right?
Total coincidence, I'm sure.
And you get a lot of this kind of thing. So this isn't even the most horrifying, by the way. If you want to hear the most horrifying.
No, yeah, and that's the thing. It was the only reason I thought it was such a good example is because she was so high up at Harvard. And I realized like I saw one where guys wrote a fake paper and they basically paid to have it published in a journal. Like there are journals that just you can just pay them money and they'll publish it. And they can lie about the peer reviewing. They can do all that kind of stuff. So, and they were doing it to prove a point that these journals are not actually gatekeeping the way they're supposed to.
You want to hear a more horrifying story?
Oh yeah, by all means.
Okay. So, there was the chairwoman of President Biden's Scientific Integrity Task Force.
Again, I love when we get things like integrity or honesty in the title.
So she lied to Congress, and she did so citing a paper that she edited, not told, that was written by her brother-in-law. And this paper was retracted from the proceedings of the National Academy because it contained massive errors. Like it was about fish, and I know nothing about fish. But
nor do I.
These were errors that were obvious to me.
Okay.
And she oversaw the whole paper's journey through peer review, and she selected the reviewers. So this is like the equivalent of selecting the judge for your trial, right?
Right.
She knowingly violated the guidelines for conflicts of interest, and this was the lady in charge of scientific integrity.
So, I mean, do you have any solutions in mind for that? Because I mean, it sounds like it's more than the universities, it's more than the federal funding, it's more than the biases, it's more than the sort of distrust now that a lot of people on the right now have of science in general. So even if something is totally legitimate and good, you've got half the country that will tend to not believe it over believing it, and I think that's. We can go too far both ways. I think we can go too far where we just believe everything and just trust. But it's sort of that, like, going back to the Reagan thing. It's like trust but verify. But now I feel like we're in the opposite land on the right specifically. It seems like anything connected to universities, elites, like anything that's older than like that, skeptical. People aren't trusting it, right? And I feel like that's a bad place to be too, right?
Well,
but
rebuilding trust is going to take time, but I know how to do it, okay? And
I would love to hear it because we need to do it.
There are simple solutions here, okay? You can do what's called pre-registration of trials. So if I'm making a hypothesis, if I want to do an experiment, instead of, doing the experiment and then generating a hypothesis, Congress could just say, we're not going to fund anything that doesn't have pre-registration, which is I tell the world what I think is going to happen, and then I do the experiment.
Yeah.
Stunning. Like
that seems pretty simple.
Yeah. Like that would fix 80% of this. Because then how most of this cheating happens is called peak hacking. And basically what that means is if I want to get a result, I run 20 different experiments and I publish the one that came back significant and I don't publish the other 19.
Don't even mention the other 19 probably, right?
But if I want to do that experiment, then suddenly I have to actually do that much better. So if pre-registration would fix a lot of this.
And then I would assume we could also fix a little bit of that by saying that the government, if they're paying for something, get all of the test results, right? I mean, like, it seems like transparency, we talk about transparency all the time, but the fact that we're not getting to see the data or the experiments that go in, like that federal tax dollars are going towards, seems like a no-brainer thing that Congress could say, right? I mean, that's just like one vote. Right, that's not more complicated than that's right.
The other thing to do would be to trust what's called meta-analyses, which are basically studies of studies more than individual studies.
Right.
Because a larger group of samples is going to be more accurate by inherent things. You could also have what's called a stricter p-value, which is basically the 1 in 20 thing, and just say higher levels of that only. But again, there's issues with that. You could also some effect sizes that are real are very small. Like the placebo effect is kind of famously, that's the thing where you take drug and you feel that's nothing and it makes you feel better regardless.
Yeah. Which is a real problem in a lot of the pharmaceutical stuff, right? I mean, it's a huge problem because their control group, well, I guess the control group's the people that don't take anything. The control group
is out of control. That's the problem here. So we have control groups, but they're not, like I mentioned earlier, that the control group of science, in my opinion, is parapsychology, the Ghostbusters stuff.
Yeah.
And again, they can generate really good, really solid looking results.
Because we're not setting that bar high enough for those results, basically.
And I don't believe in this. And what's fascinating, there's a parapsychology paper which is hilarious, and it sends me into fits of laughter whenever I read it. And basically, what it did was thought that there was it had one person who was a believer in parapsychology and one person who wasn't, and they had them run the exact same experiments like next to each other. And the guy who was a believer found results, and the guy who wasn't a believer didn't find results. And in the conclusions, they built like, how could this happen? Maybe the other guy hacked my data set. Which
they couldn't possibly be the bias of you believing in it before.
There's a zillion tiny little things. You might not even know you're doing it. There's a zillion tiny little things that just like twist your brain just a little bit. And that you can adjust to come to the conclusion you want to come to. And this is why in most science, you try as hard as possible to ensure that the person who's doing the testing has no idea what they're testing.
Right. Because then you're going to get an actual result because they're not trying to put their own... Yeah, I mean, which I guess someone got in trouble for that lately. Oh, they were all because got in trouble for it. But I mean, I was like, isn't that what they were trying to? I guess they were doing something on Reddit where it was like, I can't remember the exact details, but everyone was super mad that they were lied to about what. I was like, well, but if you were told the truth about it, you would have behaved differently. And if the point is to figure out that you kind of have to lie to people, not lie to people, you can't tell them what the experiment is, or they will just like everyone will do that. It's even on a political... And
they're often lying, and this is stuff that isn't politically controversial.
Right.
Like, this is stuff that just people believe in, right? Like, so if there's political pressure to lie, and
then it's even worse.
To lie, there's so much more than than mere, like, status pressure, right?
Do we need better... Like you mentioned a little while ago, and I kind of thought like the sort of rivalry between like the guy was a French scientist, and so England and Germany were maybe more skeptical of it or something. Do we need more like in the public view sort of scientific rivalries a la like Tesla and Edison sort of? I mean, I don't know.
That's called red teaming. And that's where you have someone who just basically tries to destroy you.
Yeah.
And that's a very good thing. The problem is that there's very little incentive to do it. So again, universities want their academics to publish.
Yeah.
The academics want to publish, and the government wants them to publish. So every incentive goes down please generate more stuff.
But is there not enough competition between like Harvard and Princeton to be like, hey, we want to prove that those guys are wrong?
No,
and we're going to do...
There's a lot of cross-pollination.
Because it just seems like that seems like enough. I mean, treat it like your football teams or something. I guess maybe they don't think of it that way.
Better, but that doesn't that happened a lot more when the world was more like split up.
Yeah,
because people like if you're living in 1900 England, you hate France.
Yeah,
be like, I'm going to prove the French wrong.
Yeah,
and that was a huge thing then. And make people, that time period of like 1870 to 1913 is like the golden age of science.
Yeah.
And that was before like government intervention. A lot of the other problem here is that these universities are massively dependent on the government.
Yeah.
So if you go back in time to that time period and you read like science fiction from that time period, they'll all say, some rich dude paid for this.
Yeah.
And that was way more effective at generating results because people wanted to know.
Yeah.
It wasn't like their job. It was like just they were curious.
Yeah. And when we were trying to learn about the world, that makes sense. It's like some of that is just like, I wonder what would happen if, right? I mean, there's some sciences that you couldn't even do here's my theory or here's my sort of prediction of what will happen, because sometimes it's just like, we literally don't know, but we want to try something wild to see what happens, right?
And there's also tons of bureaucracy here. So there's thing called an Institutional Review Board, or an IRB. So after the Second World War, the Nazis did a bunch of horrifying experiments.
Right.
And people were like, oh, the way to stop this is to bury everything in paperwork. And these institutions are awful. They are horrifying.
Well, just like all other red tape is going to deter good stuff from happening.
I have been yelled at by an IRB for the number of paperclips. Like, just like the level of stuff they get mad about and very furious about is ridiculous.
But again, like all regulation, their job is dependent on them being more important than they really are. And so they have to say, well, we've got to regulate the number of paper clips you can have and how many, they've got to add more and more stuff to it, or they can't justify their job existing, right?
And if you listen to them talk, they are the only thing standing between us and the Nazis. They're not. The other, right. And the other great example of this would be what's called bioethics. So something called a human challenge trial. Like during the crisis of COVID, right? Everyone, you could have easily gotten a bunch. It took 6 months to develop the COVID. It took days, like weeks to develop the COVID vaccine. It took months to test it. And because basically bioethics said, well, instead of testing these things rationally, you're going to just, give people a shot and then send them out to the public for 6 months. And then 6 months later, they'll come back and we'll see the rate at which they have COVID. That's a horrible way of testing it and a very slow way of testing it. Right. Instead of just, injecting them with COVID, which is unethical in a sense, and might give someone COVID and they might get hurt. But if you're doing this with volunteers and consenting test subjects, and you're like saying, these guys are the heroes, well, the alternative was that 1 million people died.
Yeah.
So which is worse, 1 million people die, or, someone who volunteered dies? Well, obviously the one of these things is worse than the other.
Well, and there was a situation during COVID, I know, with one of the, and I don't remember all the details, but it was one of the sort of, what do you call it when it's not a vaccine, but like someone already has COVID, the sort of therapeutical stuff, where it'd be like, try to make it worse, make it less bad than it could be. And at like the trial, it was going so well that the government decided to go like, you know what, actually, it would be unethical for us to not release this right now, because more people will die while this trial's going on for like our normal red tape. And so I think that's the thing, is I think you need some flexibility in these kind of things, especially in that kind of situation.
And that was with most of the red tape stripped out, believe it or not.
Right, and that's what I'm saying. They were purposely stripping out the red tape, but my point would be that, like, okay, but if the red tape was a hindrance in that situation, and it was the same thing in COVID with like liquor laws, honestly. It was like all of a sudden you can take liquor out of a place. It's like, well, wait a minute. Was this about safety or was this about red tape? Because it seems like it's more about the red tape than it really is about safety or any kind of thing like that.
Bureaucrats justifying their own existence.
Exactly. So, okay, you've mentioned a couple things that we could do. What do you... Obviously, my show is called The Homeless Conservative. I'm a conservative.
Yes.
I try to police my team more than the other team because I don't have as much control over Democrats, and they're not in power right now anyway. So I think it's a good opportunity to say, like, what should Republicans do? Like, what should the Trump administration do? If you had his ear, how would you try to fix some of this stuff? Because I feel like he's kind of going in with a sledgehammer, it feels like, and maybe that's necessary, but it doesn't feel like... To me, it doesn't feel like Trump or the administration or Congress are doing a good job at explaining why and what the end goal is. Do you feel like they have one? Do you think they need to have something that's a little more well-defined of, like I said, none of this stuff that we're talking about has been mentioned by the Trump administration or Congress, in my opinion. Like, I don't think that these things are being talked about to where the general public understands how this works.
So a lot of this is really complicated stuff. The Trump dispute with Harvard and now Columbia, which just happened today, over, I think it's Title VII, I'm not a lawyer either, so
Yeah, I mean, me neither. I know what you mean though. As far as they're going after both those universities, and specifically trying to cut funding. With Harvard, they're specifically saying they're citing anti-Semitism and stuff. But
I'm a big fan of the sledgehammer, to be honest.
I am too when it's necessary. I just like to have an end goal of like being able to tell people we're taking a sledgehammer to this because here's all the reasons this doesn't work right now, and here's what we're going to do to make it work. Because you can't just do the sledgehammer.
So
you do have to have some sort of building.
The National Science Foundation, right? Most NSF grants. So one of my favorite things the Trump administration has done is right now most NSF grants, the National Science Foundation, are granted by scientists who are on temporary leave from their universities. Shockingly, they grant money to themselves.
And then they go back. Yeah, it's the revolving door that we have.
Amazing.
Yeah.
Oh, who could have seen that one coming?
Right, yeah. Which is the same thing with lobbyists in Congress and all. It's like all these revolving doors in and out of Washington. Yeah, it's pretty gross.
One of the big changes Trump is implementing was that they would reduce the NSF roster of that kind of employee on loan from universities from 4 years to 1.
Okay.
And universities freaked out.
Of course, because they're going to get less money.
Well, it's less predictable.
I guess you're right. It's they can't guarantee.
If it's 4 years, then you can have money for the entire thing. If it's 1 year, then it's unpredictable. And I actually think it should be unpredictable because if you have there's wisdom in crowds. If you have more people involved, it's much harder to rationalize this kind of spending. Right. So I think it's completely rational. I think it's a great policy. So government funding agencies like the NSF play incredibly important roles in scientists' careers. Universities hire researchers explicitly on the ability to attract grant funding. So if you go to any researcher's CV, basically their academic resume, they will say, I got a grant from the NSF for this amount of money. And that's like up front in their resume. Like they advertise this.
Yeah, it's like it gives them credibility, right?
Well, it's like an athlete. It's like a baseball player saying, "This is my batting average."
Okay, yeah.
Like that's what they're judged on,
Yeah.
And the NSF's diversity grants are also used as justification by the Trump administration for pointing out this was very clearly illegal racial discrimination.
Right. Yeah. I don't understand where they thought that wasn't.
So, for example, Harvard literally had a published plan to increase the percentage of women and minorities to over 90%. That's an explicitly racial quota. That's illegal.
Yeah.
The Supreme Court said you can't do that.
Yeah.
And Harvard's reaction to this, to the Supreme Court saying that was make us.
Right.
Come make us.
Yeah.
And, the current Trump conflict with Harvard is largely Trump saying, okay, we're going to make you.
We're going to make you.
And there's a bunch of tactics the Trump administration is using right now. And I'm not in the administration, so I'm not the best person to talk about this. But the primary one, the most legally certain one, was the visa thing, restricting the visas of foreign students. Because that's how universities pay their bills.
Right, because they're paying full boat tuition, right?
No, they're paying more than full boat.
They're paying more.
And
so
also, university admissions for foreign students are incredibly corrupt. It's very common for students from China or India or Russia to literally their parents buy a wing at the library.
Oh yeah.
And
it's all about donors, right?
It's very common. Everyone knows this.
And they're like a quarter to a third of students too, right? I mean, it's something like that.
They can sell those slots for a lot of money, and everyone knows it. So that was Trump targeting that was, from a leverage generating perspective, a very, very smart thing to do.
And I have no problem with throwing a little bit of weight around. People are like, oh, how could he do that? And I'm like, well, I mean, I think that the universities need a stick right now. I don't think the carrot is the right tool for the job currently, because we've been giving them just, seemingly unlimited amounts of money with very little in return. And I do want to go
more than in the 50s.
Yeah. And I want to go back to us getting the results we were getting in the 50s, because we were getting things like pacemakers, microwaves, Velcro, you pick it.
The advancement was huge. And a lot of times because, so in order to fight the Soviets, quite frankly, in the 50s, they created this giant top-down central plan.
Yeah.
And that kind of worked when everyone was still in free market mode.
Yeah.
And it was in many ways the government going in as a participant. But so particularly after universities discovered that they could use, they could, I think it was in the 70s, they got the ability to issue patents on stuff.
Yeah.
And I forget the thing, but the Red Delicious apple,
Yeah.
that's a patent for a university.
Yeah. There's a ton of stuff like that, right? That like basically you incentivize them by you get a cut of this because before that the federal government got the patent and they often just didn't do anything with it. It wasn't even like the federal government just like ran away with the money they made. They just like filed it away and then never made the thing. But because they had the patent, no one else could either.
So the NSF alone spends about 25% of federal basic research, and of their money, they spend about $2 billion explicitly on DEI stuff, and a lot of the stuff is just completely absurd.
Right.
And like very famously, so like the infamous feminist glacier paper, and a lot of it, like there's been plenty of academics from dating back to the so-called affair, where they just flat out faked results.
Yeah.
And we're able to get into these journals as a result. Yeah. Famously, a comedian by the name of Steven Crowder faked, literally dressed up as a fat person and infiltrated a fat studies conference, and they asked him to be a reviewer. Just like absolute insanity. It's real. Like however bad you think it is, it's like 10 times worse.
So, I mean, to me, this is where almost every conversation ends up going for me. To me, it seems like, and tell me if I'm wrong here, I feel like if we want to get bang for our buck with taxpayer dollars that are going to fund science research, which I think is important. And look, Pete Buttigieg was on Andrew Schultz's podcast a couple weeks ago talking about how the government does all these things. Well, everything he cited was from at least 40 years ago. I mean, the newest thing he cited was the internet.
Yeah.
Which was the 80s or 70s when they... Yeah. And so, like, what's so funny about that to me is, like, Pete Buttigieg is acting like, well, the government, you need the government to do these things, but it's obviously true that, like, we're not getting those kind of results right now. So I would assume that Congress needs to step in and say, yes, these are the things that we are willing to give money for. And they could be AI development, because obviously that's a huge thing where we're in competition with China right now. I mean, pick the things that we want to say, these are important. We want to cancer. I mean, Joe Biden talked all the time about wanting to, his sort of moonshot was cancer research. I'm not aware that anything happened in the last 4 years that was a huge advancement for cancer research that came from government funding, because I would assume Joe Biden would have been talking about it all the time if such a thing happened.
The problem does not work.
Right. Because you want to say, here's money, but we've got to demand results somehow, right? And stop giving money if people don't give you results.
And the thing is, the kind of scientific, so the way the federal government funds research, it's inherently biased towards things that are pre-existing, which is the exact opposite of how science works. I believe it was the director of the American Cancer Society who said that if you trust the federal government to develop the polio vaccine, you'd have the world's best iron lung, but no polio vaccine.
Right.
Because they're focused very much on, iteration and making something slightly better. They're focused on making candles better, not making light bulbs.
Yes.
And this is the exact opposite of how it should be. So like you need that like venture capital mindset in science of like, maybe I'll lose all my money, but also maybe I'll generate a 60,000% return.
So is that sort of where, what are the kind of grants that we were giving out where, well, basically it's like government loans to private industry, right? But like Trump's cut that too. So it seems like he's also cut that sort of area of being able to go to someone like Tesla, for example, and say, yeah, we want you to develop, better. I mean, that's a perfect example of something that even lines up with the sort of progressive left, sort of global warming thing and stuff. But like, they're also cutting that kind of stuff too. But I mean, I would think that more public-private partnership kind of stuff or loans and that kind of thing would be a good thing, because I think that without the incentive of some sort of profit that you can make on it, I don't see how people aren't just going to take the money and fake research.
They absolutely take the money and fake research. So like, let me give you a good example of this. Okay. So, look, from my own background, the James Webb Space Telescope, right, ended up costing so one of the big problems with this is that agencies lie to the federal government and Congress all the time. Mm-hmm. So the James Webb Space Telescope ended up costing $10 billion, and it flew in late 2021. What year would you guess that it was supposed to fly?
Oh, I know this because I should know this because all of my desktop backgrounds you can't see are pictures from the James Webb telescope. Actually, I think it was like 2005 that it was supposed to or something. 2007. Okay,
It was supposed to cost $1 billion.
Right.
It was 10 times over its original budget and 14 years behind schedule.
Right.
In you're running a business. If I was 14 years, if I worked for you and I was 14 years behind schedule and 10 times over
10x over the budget,
would you just give me more money?
No, I would not.
And but that's basically what NASA said. It's like, oh yeah, this is hard and we just need more money. And so there's also and at least we got something out of that.
Right.
The product did exist. People criticize the F-35 a lot, but the product does exist.
True.
And
although we've lost a couple off the side of aircraft carriers lately, but yeah. That was you're right. That was F-18. Yeah.
But there's something. Everyone expects cost overruns when dealing with the government and just schedule slippage, and we don't have to accept that.
No,
Congress needs to actually do something, and they never do. But
it's because that incentive structure is wrong because it's because
there's no votes in doing it correctly.
That's true,
and there's a lot of votes in doing it incorrectly. So I think of how big employers universities are.
Right.
They're huge employers, and they're local employers.
Which is why someone like Tommy Tuberville is willing to say something negative about Donald Trump because of the University of Alabama. It's he realized that that's a bigger political force sometimes than Donald Trump is, which is saying a lot.
So if you're like the University of Kansas, right? It's politically impossible to cut your money, even if you're in a deep red state.
Yeah.
So there's not very little desire to actually use the power of Congress and state legislatures. Most of these schools are funded by states directly. So Harvard's a bad example. Harvard's a private university, but even they get tons of federal money.
Oh, but they get tons of federal money. Yeah.
And there's very little incentive to use the power of the purse because most people have positive thoughts about their university, be it for football, basketball, whatever. Yeah. There's a lot of universities that are basically, in some ways, they're not a school football team; they're a football team with the school.
Yeah.
And look, I was an athletics tutor in my college days, right? My undergraduate days, and my school, no one has ever heard of us for anything athletic. Mm-hmm. It was not very good.
Right.
And there was immense pressure to pass students just for being athletic.
Yeah.
And this was not Alabama, Ohio.
You're not USC or something. Yeah.
Where that's sort of defensible because it's a school with a football team.
Yeah.
But this was a very not good team. But my point here is that there's stuff we could be doing. There's power that we could use to improve this, and it's not being used because most people like their universities. So, but that's ending. And what I think will probably happen over the next couple of years is the power, the huge prestige and power of universities is going to decline. And we're already seeing that 80 universities have closed since 2020. More are projected. There are fewer kids of the appropriate age to go to these places.
Yeah. Just the demographics don't work.
The business model is dying. So Harvard will be fine. Princeton, Stanford will be fine. They'll live. But a lot of the so-called directional schools, if there's direction in your school's name, you did not go to a good school. Right. Sorry, unless you're going to a Northwestern.
Right. Yeah. Exceptions.
But generally speaking, if you're East, whatever.
Right.
Yeah. You went to a probably bad school. A lot of those schools are going to fold.
Oh, of course. Yeah.
That just makes the competition worse. So if you have fewer positions for these people, these schools are in many ways a pyramid scheme. They're churning out more and more and more and more and more people for jobs that don't exist.
Right.
And the only thing they qualify to do is teach. And that incentivizes even more lying and dishonesty.
Well, especially when take away the grant money. Almost all the money they're getting is from the federal government, if in this form of student loans.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? That's the other thing. It's there's sort of an incestuous thing there too. Yeah. To me, it seems like there's going to have to be.
That one's easy to fix, though. You just make the university responsible for it.
Right. Yeah. I think there's lots of ways to fix that. I think you could have people not have to pay, like take percentage of their job that they get. So it encourages universities to get you a good job. I mean, there's all sorts of ways I think you could incentivize the student loan kind of stuff. I mean, I feel like because Congress is not interested in doing this, because most people are acting on partisan things and not really about like the advancement of science or like getting these big results, I think it's going to have to be an external force. I mean, I think it's going to have to be like China like beats us to something so obviously technologically or science that
part of the system is already factored into the incentive flow.
Yeah.
The consumer, in this case, the students, are like in many ways outside of it. You need someone who doesn't have an incentive to come in and break it up.
Yeah.
Systems are not always capable of improving on their own.
Yeah.
So like, there's a bunch of examples of this I could cite. But like, it's like famously Scientific American, and get huge publication, was running around tweeting that men invented women in the 18th century to oppress them.
Right. I remember this.
And when you say this kind of thing, the average American who you're asking to pay your bills goes, that's insane.
Well, yeah, because I mean, it's absolutely insane.
Yeah, and when you do that kind of thing, and they were promoting a documentary, which is very, very crazy. And what happens with these kind of things? Oh, also very famously, their evidence for this, they cited a survey by the Center for American Progress. The Center for American Progress is literally led by John Podesta, who's former Chief of Staff and the chair of Hillary Clinton's campaign. Yeah. Like, that was the science they were doing.
That's their scientist, yeah.
And it's like, come on, guys. You're just lying, you know?
Also, I mean, we've got literature from before whatever year that they said it was. That's such a silly claim.
So my thing on the Harvard thing went very viral on Twitter, right? And what was crazy was that a lot of academics were coming after me and saying, no one will ever hire you. Why are you saying this? And I'm like, well, first of all, I'm not an academic anymore. So good luck.
Yeah.
And second of all, aren't you concerned that your first threat is no one will hire you? Like, doesn't that kind of indicate that your field is in crisis?
Yeah, and I feel like it sort of proves the point that if that's the tool you're using to get people to not go against you or say anything bad about you, or to even just question your science, that's not good enough. To me, you've got to be able to back it up with the data. And I just think that, so I think we need a combination of like better PR. Like, I think if you're, like, good scientists need to get out there and talk about this kind of stuff better. Maybe a little rivalry, although I think what your point of the sort of national thing, I think now the problem is probably that people identify as scientists and part of that community more than they identify as American or any sort of other thing where they got another competition thing. They're just trying to be in the club, right? And that's bad too, because there's all sorts of studies which
that I know are wrong. Like, I'm not a flat Earth person. I know those people are wrong. But when you get Neil deGrasse Tyson, like, basically using them as a punching bag, you're not persuading them.
Right.
You have to actually go and do the difficulty of saying, okay, here's why I think you're wrong. But it's
or come at me with a point that you think you have, and I will tell you why I think that point is wrong.
Much easier just to like dismiss people and make fun of them. But once you do that, you've lost them forever.
Although it is very hard for me not to make fun of the flat earthers. Yeah. But I do agree with you in general. That is just one where I go,
they are a very easy target, and they are
they're so easy.
Target. But like, it's, and like, when you, even with groups like that, like, look, I don't believe in parapsychology, I don't believe in the flat earth, but even groups like that, you can learn something from these people and why they think it, because like, it's actually fascinating why they're wrong. I used to work for House Science, right? And a lot of what I was doing was supervising interns on the alien line, because shockingly, the kind of person who calls House Science is often a believer in aliens.
Right.
And so as a result, I have an encyclopedic knowledge of every alien conspiracy theory.
You know all of them.
Because I have heard them. You're not allowed to hang up on constituents.
So you had to really hear it all.
So you have to think, okay, just keep talking. So I am, by the way, not a believer in UFOs or any of that. Very, very aggressively skeptical to it. My editor, NR, is a huge believer. So...
That is one where I am certainly baffled by some of the stuff that I need better explanations for. But I'm a little bit, just some of the stuff that we've gotten in the last couple of years have been, like, I don't know what the explanation for that is, but I don't know that it's aliens either.
In my opinion, the best explanation is, I mean, we know this for a fact. Intelligence agencies often use that as a tool of outing other people who are
like the sort of psyop sort of stuff on their own people to see who's being a leak or
also, so Harry Reid, the former Senate Majority Leader, was a huge believer in UFOs. Mm-hmm. And he appointed a bunch of people to these agencies that were also huge believers in UFOs. Yeah. And all those people are now retiring. They're at that point in their career. So now they're coming out with like all this stuff. So like, imagine you're like a CIA analyst, right? And you hear that, like, we sent in Delta Force to recover a crashed craft. You're not thinking, that's a Chinese helicopter. Yeah. You're thinking aliens.
Right, because that's where that's what you want to believe, right? It's the classic X-Files thing. You want to believe.
Like XCOM is real.
Now, I will say, I have seen a UFO. I'm not saying it was alien. It might have just been a military craft that didn't exist, but it was not a plane that exists that I know about. And this was 20 years ago. And I was like, I could see the actual ship itself. It wasn't like a light in the ground, stuff like in the sky. But I'm like, it's probably a government plane that we don't know exists. I mean, that's that's where I'm going logically, is that like we didn't know about the B-2 stealth bomber for a long time either. We didn't know about the helicopters that we used to
of Black Triangle sightings right before the B-2 stealth bomber was unveiled.
Yep, exactly. And so like it was something similar to the B-2, except it was silent and could hover in the same spot for a long time. But
what often happens with this kind of thing, again, it's very easy to interpret things like that, and people who don't know what they're like, people want it to be aliens, so their brain finds a way to believe it's aliens. Right. It's the exact same function that normally happens in science. Is if you want to believe something is true, you will find ways to
believe it's true.
You're gonna be a lawyer for that, rather than impartially seeking the truth, and you might not even know you're doing it.
And sometimes, like, I'm okay with that. It's just that I want someone else to be able to question that. Yeah. Does that make sense? And when we're not,
the best you can do is be upfront about them.
Right. And I think
believe this because that.
And in those situations, if someone comes out with a study that like comes to a conclusion that maybe they got to because they sort of had an idea of where they wanted to go, and then even if it was totally unconscious, right? It, like, they didn't do it on purpose, they weren't lying about the data, they weren't falsifying it or something like that, like in the case that we were talking about to lead the show. But even then, I want someone to be able to come up and argue it, because the truth is, most of us, I mean, you even have over and over again in this conversation, and like, I'm not a lawyer, I'm not and most of us aren't scientists. Most of us don't understand this stuff. We need it to be told to us in a way that we can understand it. That's where the sort of PR aspect of this comes in, is like, someone does need to be able to say what this means. But then I also want someone to be able to argue with that person and not be told, oh, you're never going to be able to work in academia, or we're going to take away your research money because you argued with
it. But that's the problem. Everything is trying to, like, they will. The immediate threat is always, we'll take the money. Yeah. And it gets dropped at the drop of a hat. Yeah. And you get people particularly like on Twitter, you'll literally see people like, there's a meteorologist of my association named Chris, and he's slightly climate skeptical. Mm-hmm. And God, they go after him like so aggressively. Right. It's constant. And you get people from very prominent institutions just openly saying, we'll never hire you.
Right. And to me, I think science always needs a skeptic, even if they're totally wrong. Like, to me, like, doesn't that make sense to...
Yeah, that's called red teaming. And you need that.
You need that.
But there's no incentive to do it. Right. So
do we just need a giant, like, does Elon Musk need to like fund red teaming or something? I mean, like, it sounds crazy, but it does seem like, I mean, that was a solution in the past before government funded, right?
That was basically what happened before government funded. Yeah. And you also had people, so in my own field, like, it's a great, I really recommend you watch a documentary. It's amazing, called The Bone Wars. Okay. Where two paleontologists basically fought like a duel to the death to discover more dinosaurs.
I love the idea of this already.
And they started like dynamiting each other's dinosaur finds and stuff, because the academic rivalry was so intense. They were literally blowing up each other's stuff, and they were sneaking in to steal from each other's camps and stuff. Just like absolute craziness. And it was great. I recommend everyone read the Wikipedia page. It's amazing. And that level of competition incentivizes actual results because you can't fake reality. You can't trick reality. Science is when everything else goes away, it's what's left.
But unfortunately, that motivation in that situation was that they hated each other, and right now everyone else
really
seems to be
good motivation, though.
That is a great motivation. It just doesn't seem like most people are more. It seems like more people are motivated by the money, or the lack thereof of it, than anything else.
There's no money to be made in debunking it. There's a lot of money to be made in saying it. So it's another thing in my field, like it's called uniformitarians versus catastrophists. This is the whole geological debate. If things happen gradually or happen all at once, and obviously the answer is both. But a lot of the original thing, the theory of plate tectonics, which is how we have big plates under the earth that move around on the mantle. Yeah. That was a really controversial thing. People got fired for believing in that. And that was in like the 50s when it was much less polarized than it is today. Like people got sacked for that, and they were right.
Which is also unfortunately a history of science, right? Is that a lot of times the correct people are ostracized.
Bad idea gets counter argument, does not get forced, does not get defunded, does not get bullet, never.
Yeah.
And that's the thing, but it's much easier to just go, get that guy off the stage. And it's like really, really quite bad. And this happens all the time. And you get diversity grants, which like throw a whole different thing in there, and that's very destructive for entirely different reasons. Yeah. But the really destructive stuff, and also it's very fake.
Well, and you're potentially saying no to someone that is better, and it's like, I mean, Harvard got in trouble for doing this with Asian students specifically, and I mean, not enough trouble in my opinion. I don't agree with the Supreme Court that they said that wasn't discrimination. I mean, I feel like it absolutely was. They were trying to do it by some sneaky way of not saying it wasn't your race, but they were doing this sort of shibboleth that you have to know.
Saying it to each other openly in emails.
I know, but like, so I think that was a good example. But like, we should be. My only concern is how good are you at the thing that you're applying for? How good a scientist are you? How good of whatever football player you are? I don't care. Like I don't care about any of the other stuff, and I'm all for
by which we judge these things are hackable, and they're being hacked. That's my point.
Yeah, and so I don't think that leaves us in a lot of. I don't know that there's a lot of optimism necessarily that we're going to be able to solve this really soon, but I unfortunately think it will be some sort of external. It will be like China beats us to some major scientific thing that makes us wake up and realize, okay, we actually have to take this more seriously than we do, because it doesn't seem like we are taking it very seriously as a country.
I mean, the biggest problem I would say is called the ideological spotlight effect, or the drunkard search principle. It's when that's my own phrasing for it. But if you lose your key, if you're drunk and you lose your keys. Mm-hmm. And you start looking for them under the spotlight because that's the easiest place to look, right?
Right.
That's not actually where you probably lost your keys.
Yeah.
And what happens is that you get this insane situation where people look for things in the easiest place for them psychologically.
Yeah.
So there's a really famous case in 2008 by the University of Nebraska, which about conservative psychology, right? And the research, clearly motivated by psychology. By ideology, suggested that conservatism stems from conspiratorial thinking and a negativity bias.
I remember this one, yeah.
And this was entirely impossible to replicate, but it was already out in the media.
Yeah. Oh, it was everywhere. I mean, that thing got published everywhere because it was like, oh, now we have a conservative brains are broken. I mean, like that was essentially the headline.
Well, no, we're not to the good part yet. They inverted the data. It showed the exact opposite.
They just totally lied about it?
No, they didn't lie. They were wrong.
Well,
they hit the wrong tab and they flipped it.
Oh, so just acts. Oh my
so their data actually said was the exact opposite what they claimed it said. And nobody. The retraction got 1/20 of the,
and it was no one ever no one ever goes back and says we were wrong about it. I mean, we're only I bet we're barely getting that from the people that cited this Harvard lady.
They wanted to believe it,
right?
And if you want to believe it, and you want to believe that, oh, my political enemies, they're just dumb.
Yeah.
Good luck with that. You're gonna get wrong answers. And for some reason, the fact that they keep getting wrong answers has not dissuaded them from thinking the political enemies are stupid.
Well, it's because they keep getting money to get the wrong answers, right?
And the fact that you should, if you're doing science and the result conforms to your preconception, you should be more skeptical of that result, because your brain has a lot of ways of cheating.
Yeah, our brains want to take the easiest path. They want to be right. Like, there's all sorts of things. Yeah, you're right. You want to be, and like I said, I even want to do this when I'm troubleshooting stuff. I'm like a audio, video, guitarist, musician guy. So my entire, like, any sort of scientific method I have is like troubleshooting. It's like, okay, point A, point B. And I don't know. I feel like even in that, sometimes I'm like, my least favorite thing that happens is when I fix something, but I don't know how I fixed it. Like, that makes me more crazy. I go like, well, no, I need to know what happened. And I don't understand why that wouldn't be. I mean, I guess that just gets overrun by what you want to believe and where the money is.
Well, music is something that people like to do, and they're doing it for those. If all the money in music went away tomorrow, people would stay playing music because it's fun.
Yes, exactly. Yeah.
But that if it's your job on the line, you're gonna find a way to say, it's true. And like a lot of these academics, they lead pretty good lives. It's pretty good life. It's fairly high status, fairly high prestige, reasonably well paid. Yeah. If you introduce yourself as, I'm a scientist.
Yeah. And high competition, which means it's easy to keep people out. Yeah.
Because any tiny little thing that you do wrong, you're out forever. Like
you're ostracized.
I could never work in science now.
Which is
yeah,
that's a shame. Well, Andrew, how do people tell us how people find you on Twitter and whatnot?
Okay, my Twitter is Andrew C. Follett, Follett. I'm there probably too much, and I write for the National Review. Just my author page is there, and thank you. Be very skeptical of anything, but what I just told you is true, and you can confirm it for yourself. Do your research on this.
We'll link to both of those things in the show notes. And Andrew, before we started recording, was trying to convince me to get back on Twitter. We'll see. I might dip my toe back in. We'll see. I've been off for several years, but maybe
adversarial process.
Exactly. See, and I'm gonna even though my belief is that I'm gonna go in there and be angry again, maybe I won't be. So I'll give it another shot because you've convinced me to give it another shot. So, Andrew, thank you so much for coming on. I really appreciate talking about this. Unfortunately, I don't feel like we solved the world's problems when it comes to science, but I do hope things get better. I do want the Trump administration and Congress to be able to make this process a little better. I'm just so far a little bit concerned that it's all hammer, no sort of plan on the other side of that. So I hope I'm wrong about that, and they do have some sort of way to improve this, because we do need these scientific advancements. Like we need good science.
So again, we're not getting a lot right now.
We're just not. We need more moonshots, pacemakers, those kind of things that we're just like, the government is actually not, our taxpayer dollars are not getting those kind of results right now. And I think that
the government has direct policy levers, like the NSF, the National Health Institute, the Department of Energy, and all that stuff. If government cannot improve how we do science, you have to wonder what it can do.
Excellent point. They have more control over that probably than anything else, including the economy. So, all right. Well, thank you so much for coming on, Andrew. We will talk to you some other time, I think.
Great.
My thanks again to Andrew for joining me on today's show. Really appreciate you joining as well. You can find links to Andrew's Twitter and his National Review articles in the show notes. And if you could do one thing for me, you could rate the podcast wherever you listen. I greatly appreciate that. If you can do two things, share it with a friend. That also helps me as well. Thanks a lot for joining me. I will catch you next time.